Hello everybody, my name's Kris. Welcome to my studio. In our lesson today, I'm going to show you how I paint this rural landscape with a red barn. I love red barns, and I wanted to show you today how I painted this. In this step-by-step lesson, I'm going to demonstrate first of all how I do the blue sky with the white fluffy clouds. I paint the sky and clouds with just two colors. I'm going to demonstrate that. Next, I want to show you how I use multiple layers of transparent colors to get the depth and the tonal values that I'm looking for throughout the painting. Thirdly, I want to show you then how I use and achieve depth in the tree area and the midground by using negative painting to bring out some of the shapes of the trees. And lastly, I want to show you how I paint the barn, how I add details, and even a little trick at the very end of the video about how I add some highlights to the red barn, which is the primary subject matter of the painting. Before I jump into all that, I want to show you my color palette and show you the 5 colors that I use in this painting. I only use 5, and I don't use a green out of the tube. Instead, I mix colors to get my green, and that gives me a nice variance of colors, kind of from blue to the gold through the green, and gives me a nice variety of colors in the tree area. So let's get started. Okay, getting started, let's talk about the colors I use in the sky. I actually use just 2 colors in the sky, and the first is this light blue. This blue is called Cerulean Blue Chromium, the Daniel Smith color, and it's grainy, has a grainy quality to it, and it's a really beautiful color. It works great for skies, and we can see here, I'll kind of let it blur out. In addition to that, I'm also using Indigo. Indigo is a gray color. It's a bluish gray, and so you can see I've got a nice mix of that. Here I'm laying it down fairly dark, and then you can see how it also comes out to a nice gray color. Now when I mix these two, which is what I do in parts of the clouds, then I get some dark shadowy areas in the clouds, and that's how I do that, using those 2 colors alone. That's Cerulean Blue Chromium and Indigo. Next, I have on my palette, this is Nickel Quinacridone Gold. Oh, I love this color. It's a beautiful color. As you can see, you put that down as a pure color, and it's very much a gold color. As you thin it out, however, into a wash, you see it becomes quite yellow, and it's just a beautiful color. And I use that some in the foreground and in parts of the tree area. It's the first wash I put down through much of the painting. But then I come back and I take that color and I mix it with my ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue, a very common color, and we can see that here. Almost every palette will have ultramarine blue on it, and it's a beautiful blue. I feel it's a little too dark a lot of times to use, and not quite the right color. It's more of a watercolor than sky, so I don't tend to use it for my skies very much. But we see ultramarine blue there. And then what I do is for the green area of the painting, and there's a lot of green in this painting, I take my Quinacridone Gold and my ultramarine blue and mix that, and that's what gives me, and I'll just put that down here in between the two, that's what gives me this beautiful green color. Okay, and again, obviously we know that yellow and blue makes green, and so what's nice about this though is I can come back and I could make that green a little darker by adding more blue into it, or I could come back into that same wash somewhere and add more yellow to it, and sorry, it's Quinacridone Gold, and kind of lighten up that green quite a bit, and just kind of do a combination of these 2 colors in various varying degrees of pigment combination, and getting a variety of green to gold to bluish green, and it worked really well, I think, in this painting. And so those 2 colors together combining for that. And then last but not least, we know we have a red barn in the painting, and so I need a red. And so this is Alizarin Crimson, and it's a nice bright red. Can get really dark like that, like I've just laid it down, but also we can see that go into a beautiful wash and lighten up to a lighter color. I use that some as well, I should say. I take at points, I take the Quinacridone gold and combine that with a little bit of the red, not very much, but that gives me my orange color. You can see there on the palette. And that orange I use some in the highlights of the trees, where they're kind of kind of almost a see-through area in the trees, and they have kind of a goldish red orangey tone to them, and that's how I created that. So those are the 5 colors I use in this painting. Cerulean blue chromium, indigo, those are the first 2 colors in the sky area, then nickel quinacridone gold and ultramarine blue in various combinations to either by themselves or used together to create the green. And I never really use the ultramarine blue by itself. It's always combined with the quinacridone gold to make a green. And then last but not least, permanent alizarin crimson for my red, and I also use that combined with other colors. I think it's really important that you limit your palette. Don't use every color on your in your collection of colors. Limit it. Always have a good blue, a good red, a good yellow, and you see I have that here, and then maybe some other colors to support that. And you'll be much better off if you limit your palette in your paintings. Alright, let's get started. Okay, you can see here I've transferred the line art image of the red barn onto my watercolor paper, and I'm ready to get going. I want to show you really quickly the reference image. This is a picture of a red barn in Skagit Valley in northwest Washington State, near where I live, and I took this one picture one day when driving through the valley, and I thought it would be a great reference image to use. And so hopefully you've got that image now transferred over to your watercolor paper and you're ready to go. I've got my palette here, and let's get started. First thing I want to do is paint the sky, and I've decided I'm going to use cerulean blue. Cerulean blue chromium actually is what I have. It's a Daniel Smith color. And I'm going to wet the entire area of the sky down to the tree line. I'm using a fairly large brush. This is a 3/4 inch oval, also known as a cat's tongue. I believe that's what it's called. Painting right through these trees that the foreground trees or whatever, midground trees that come up through the sky area. So I'm not trying to retain anything there. I'm just going to go right through those. So the entire area down to the tree line that represents the hill in the background. That's where I'm wetting that. I'm doing it, getting it pretty wet all the way up to the corner of the paper. Now I'm going to come out and I'm going to grab some cerulean blue. Cerulean blue is a great color for skies. I'm getting that pretty soupy mix here, and now I'm actually just going to go ahead and just back and forth across the top. Skies are usually darker towards the top, is that right? And I'm just going to go ahead and put that color right down to there, and I did that pretty quickly, as you can see. Now, one way to do clouds is to take a piece of tissue. It could be water, it could be paper towel as well, but I think tissue actually might work a bit better because it's got a little softer edges on it. And I'm just going to go in and I'm going to pick up that cerulean blue in the areas that are the clouds in my picture. And that's a great way to get that effect. Now the paper is still a little wet, and so I'm going to take my number 14 here, and I'm going to pick up a little of my indigo. Indigo is a bluish gray. Some people like to use Payne's gray. I really like this indigo color because I see a lot of gray in the reference image kind of underneath underneath the mass of clouds. And so I'm going to just put that in there. Again, particularly wanting some areas of the paper are a little bit more dry than others. I don't want real hard edges, so I'm coming back, softening that up a little bit. And see that. And again, I'm just going right up to where the dark trees, that line of trees up there. Alrighty, I like that. I think that looks pretty good. These clouds to the far right are more of a pure white, so I think I'll leave that. Now, I'm just going to let that stay like that, I think. I think I may come back later and do some more darkening of the sky, but I don't want to do it now, because I think that I'll get trouble with blooms and that kind of thing. I'm going to work down. I've got my board at a slight tilt, at about 20-degree tilt. So whatever, I usually start from the top and work down, because I'm going to work with gravity in my favor. What I'm going to do is, I see kind of a yellowish tone behind all of, well, let's see here. I've got this nickel. This is nickel quinacridone gold. So if you have any kind of gold or orangey, well, it'd be more of a gold, yellow gold color. I want that out. I also want a nice mix of this green gold out, I think. I think I'm actually gonna go with the green gold, and I'm just gonna do a really light, and I'm not really touching the colors that I put down in the sky. I don't really want this green gold to blend or rush up into the sky area, because the yellowish with the blue would really give me green, and I don't really want green. Now there's a few places where it is touching. I'm not gonna cry over spilled milk there if it does touch a little bit. Okay, I'm going fairly quickly. This is now, as you note, I did not put down water in these areas first. I instead I'm going to go ahead and actually go right through. So I'm painting, what I mean to say is I am painting with this green gold. I am painting wet on dry. I'm retaining the white areas, which are important on the roof of the barn. I'm going to paint right through these lower trees and right into, I'm going to lighten this mix as I pull it down into the foreground. Now the foreground, really I'm using, again, this is a number 14 brush, and so I'm just going to bring that, I want to retain the white areas of the buildings, and I'm not going to go through the barn at this point because I don't want a goldy yellow color in the background of that barn at all. Okay, now got that down, and with that I'm going to mix up some of this nickel quinacridone gold. Again, it's a goldish color, and I'm going to mix that up with actually my ultramarine blue, because I'm looking for a green. I could just use, I guess I could use a green, like a sap green on my palette, but I think I really prefer to mix something. Now, that's pretty dark. I'm not sure I want to go quite that dark. I'm going to bring some of that gold back in, and so I've got something that looks like that. And yeah, it's going to be a really beautiful. Alright, I'm just gonna touch now up in here. I'm trying to get a sense, as we can see in that reference image, there's all kinds of real dark foliage comes down in here. I'm gonna down to the top of the barn. And I'm just looking at that reference image and trying to emulate where I see some of that dark. There are places I could leave light for this tree. These, I don't know what you call them, the mid-ground trees. So I'm really taking this pretty soupy mix of this darkish green, and I'm just my back. This area is still it's not real wet. It's just it's again because I did not put down a strong. I did not put down a wash before I started this. The paper was I had put down that yellow, green, gold wet on dry, and so when you do that and don't have a lot of water down at the beginning, you really the paper can dry pretty quickly, as we're seeing there. Okay. Okay. I'm going to take, believe it or not, a little bit of this red and mix it up in here, because that is going to give me almost a brown color. And then I'm just going to come in here and get some of these different colored trees. I'm really doing an initial wash at this point, right? Which is, you know, usually when you first start a painting, you're just trying to get, except for the real white areas of your painting, you're just really trying to get lay down some of the base colors throughout your painting, just laying down an initial wash. So I'm getting it's fairly light. You're not using real dark tones at this point. I see. I want to come back at this gold color and look in here in some areas that I have. There should be a bit more of a gold, and that's going to be true where a lot of this tree is. These mid-ground trees that go up even up into the sky, and because it's still fairly wet, it's spreading out nicely. Alright, and again over in here a bit, so got a little bit of this gold, but then I really want to take a bit more of the red. I'm using, by the way, it's Alizarin crimson, what I have there. Again, I'm still only thinking about initial washes here, but I do see some red. This is it's not really a fall scene because the trees are, it's really more of a winter scene. The trees are fairly barren. Actually, I think I took this picture in March, so the trees aren't really, oops, a little bit too, okay. I like that. What I don't like here, I'm not sure I like some of these hard edges in here. So I'm just coming back with a little bit of water. I gotta be careful here, just get blooms, but I'm just lightening up. You can take a brush that is not very wet at all, doesn't have much water on it at all, and you can come back, especially if things haven't dried too much yet, and you can lift areas, so or blend edges that are a little too hard. So that's just what I'm doing here. There's just a variety of tones, and even with some of these mid-ground trees, there's some areas that are a little bit light in there, and so I wanted to want to retain some of that. Okay, now look what's happening down here. I've got this just kind of flowing down in there. I don't know if I like that too much, so I'm going to come back. I'm going to grab that nickel orange, mostly that, and mix it up, a little bit of water here. And I'm going to just kind of blend that along in there. Again, that foreground is like a stubble field there, just a goldy color for the most part. So I just wanted to, and I'm just going right through those fence lines down, creating something like that for now. And if some of this kind of flows down in there, there's nothing wrong with that, that's fine. I may even come back and grab, now that I've got that green mix that I had, I'm going to take some of that and just lightly okay. Now, I really want this to dry at this point. This is my initial wash, and before I go any further, I'm going to let her dry. I need to get out my hair dryer here and dry it a bit. Okay, what I want to do next, I think, is I want to come back up into the sky area, and I really want to darken that sky area. I need to clean up a bit of my palette here so I have a place that I can mix up just the blue without getting it mixed into a bunch of other colors. I'm still going to use this Cerulean blue chromium, and but I'm going to go back. I really want a darker sky. So on this next pass, I'm going to get this all wet again up here. I need to really make sure my water's clear because I've got a lot of yellow and green in it, and only go into the blue sky area now. So using my number 14 round, a little bit smaller brush than I used before, I'm going to come back and just come right down to the tops of these clouds, and then kind of really wet down this whole sky area. Yeah, I must not have perfectly clean water. I've got a little bit of yellow in there. Oh well. And now I'm going to come back and grab my cerulean blue and a little bit. This is going to be a pretty dark application here, and I'm just going to come in, and this cerulean blue is kind of an interesting blue in the sense that it's kind of grainy. So some watercolors have more of a granular, when they dry, there's a lot of granular effect to them, and some people really like that. They seek out colors that have that granulating effect. Other people don't like it as much. It's really your preference whether you like it or not. I do like that. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of take a smaller brush here and kind of lighten up that where that line is. Now there's areas in the clouds where this blue kind of comes down into the clouds. So I'm going to just drag some of that in there, and just let it just soften those edges with clear water on my brush so I don't get a lot of hard edges. As we see, there's actually the line between the clouds and the sky in this particular picture is pretty strong. There are areas where you could certainly, up in here and stuff like that, have some pretty strong lines between the blue sky and the clouds. But then there are other areas where it seems to, the blue seems to just gradually fade off into the white, right? So we need to soften those edges along those clouds. I think that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to leave that for now. I see that there is some bluish that could, again, I've got a real light, and I had put down this gray, sorry, it's an indigo in here before, but I want to have a little bit more emphasis upon the bottom side of the clouds, which are more gray. So I laid down a bit more of that cerulean blue. Some of the edges are too distinct, too hard edged, so I'm coming back and really softening those edges. What they call, you'll hear watercolors talk about lost and found edges. What they mean is you have a hard edge that goes along, and all of a sudden that hard edge just kind of disappears into a very diffused soft edge, and then a little later it comes back. Lost and found edges. So that's what I'm trying to do up in the clouds up in there. These are beautiful clouds, and learning to do clouds is an art form in and of itself. Okay, and again, these clouds have more than just that blue color and white. They also have a little of this, using again indigo. So I just picked up a little bit more of my indigo, because this is pretty, some of these areas on the bottom of these clouds are pretty dark, and so I want to emphasize them a little bit more. I'm not too worried about where the trees are. Going to be over that, because I'll come back later with a light wash and add the trees. Okay, I think that's good enough for my sky and clouds, my second wash. Now I'm going to do is mix up a darker mix of my tree color, the tree line that is along the back edge. Again, I'm going to use the same colors I used before. I say this all the time, you should have a very limited color palette. You shouldn't just use every single one of the 24 colors on your palette. You should decide ahead of time which colors you're going to use, and then only use those in your painting. Otherwise it tends to get kind of a jumbled, I don't know, it's just a real, it gets too busy, I guess is the best word to use for it. The color palette is too busy with too many different colors. So I'm using that nickel gold again with my ultramarine blue, which is the same ones I used before when I did that dark, and now I'm just coming back in. I really want to, now I'm trying to avoid touching anywhere where I just put down the blue sky, because if I don't, this green's going to go right up into the sky. But I'm using the brush, holding it so it's pointing upwards. So then, as I do this, especially along this edge here, I'm getting the look of tree line, right? Now I have a little bit of this green is flowing up into the sky, I guess. There's a little bit of blooming, or a little bit of, but it's called, it tends to lend itself to creating what we would call atmospheric perspective. Basically, the further things get away from you in distance, the more blurred they are, and so having a little bit of a blurry edge there, and that's one reason why I go back and start painting right away the green, even though I just did the sky, because I really do want to get a little bit of blurring the soft edges on these trees. Okay, I just mixed a little bit of the green gold into it because I don't want just a solid mass of the same color now as I go down through these trees, because if you look out at a hill line of trees, you're not going to see the same color by any means, right? You're going to see the colors go from one to the other. I just mixed in even more blue. I don't want to go too blue, but when you get that blue in there, you get almost a black color. It actually looks really pretty. Now that I'm doing it, I kind of like it. So then I'm looking where these areas might be the most. I almost think that brush is a little small. Again, I say this a lot of times in my lessons. You kind of want to use the largest brush possible in any big area, in any area. And so you're not messing around with little tiny strokes. Okay, so alright, what am I trying to do here? So yeah, I kind of like that. No, I'm going back to my little bit smaller brush. And I'm also going kind of in between these mid-ground trees because I want to retain some of the trunks, right? Because there's these trunks that are have a lighter color to them, and if I just go right over them with this dark color, I'm going to lose that. This could get tricky. This could get a little too busy in here. I'm coming right down to the tops of these reddish trees that I saw in there earlier, and I'm just going to do kind of an edge along where those meet these middle trees, green trees. Yeah. This edge up near the sky has dried even more at this point. At least the sky is pretty more dry, but I've still got quite a bit of wetness in the paper in these tree areas, so I'm just coming back. I added more blue into my color so that I could darken it even more. Again, this line of trees, or this mass of trees, is pretty dark in the picture. And am I just getting a single color and putting it on there? No. I'm kind of going back and forth between the bluer, kind of mixing in more blue to get dark, and then maybe coming back and getting more of the gold and mixing that in so that I get kind of a mixing back and forth between these two colors. Now again, the area of highest contrast is going to be where my eye is going to be drawn, and areas where dark and light values come up against each other. And I'm seeing that happening where the skyline is hitting the trees. I'm also seeing that, so I've got that pretty strong contrast there. I'm also going to, obviously, the The roof of the barn is going to be one of the lightest areas, and some of the detail areas on the barn are going to be retained, very light colored. So I'm just continuing this process. You don't have to, you're not painting every little tree, obviously, partly because you can't even see them, but in the reference picture, but you're also just wanting to give the sense of trees. And I'm not painting in the exact same place for each tree that I did before, so there's some lighter trees behind. And I'm seeing in that reference picture just a real, again, kind of a beautiful back and forth between green and gold in there. And the green, again, I mixed up ultramarine blue and nickel quinacridone gold. Maybe not a color you've heard of before. I guess it has nickel in it. It's one reason why watercolor paints are so expensive, because of the actual minerals and things that are in the colors, which can be pricey. Okay, there you go. I'm thinking that that's good for the trees there in the background. I want to go ahead and let this dry at this point. I think at this point I want to go ahead and start to work on the barn a little bit. So I am going, again, I'm using Alizarin Crimson as my red color. Make a little room here on my palette for that. I kind of want it to be a pure color, not mixing in with anything else around it. See that here in the palette. Yeah, I think I'm just going to go ahead and paint this, try to paint it fairly quickly. Not really worried about retaining the whites on the side of the barn there. Only areas that are really white, there's a little bit on the edge there, like a trim. I think I might try to retain that. Then move up into this area. No need to retain whites there until I get over to the barn door, and then up. And again, the reason why I'm trying to go quickly, otherwise you're going to find, if you don't go quickly, you're going to find that you starts to dry and you get hard edges where you did not want any. Okay, so there's yeah. So you just do the best you can there to kind of leave the whites of the roof, the whites of the doors, and the whites of the trim on the barn. And then just let it be. Just put down the initial wash and walk away. Okay, don't do anything else with it right now. Now we're just going to leave that, let it dry. Why? Well, because if we mess around with it too much, we may may find that we don't get the results we want. Now I'm going to add a bit more red into these massive middle trees here. Even though in the picture they're more of a yellow, I think they will stand out from the colors around them if I do a wash, a bit more of a red wash. Now I don't want it to be too, might even be better to call it more of an orange. So I'm going to take this alizarin crimson and I'm going to mix it with some of that nickel gold that I was using earlier with my blue, and get it where I want. One thing you'll see that I'm doing, you can't see it's off camera, but I will mix my colors and kind of put them down on a piece of paper and just see what the intensity of the color is before I commit and put it down. So that's pretty good. It's kind of an orangey color, and this is all dry in here now. And again, I have just a sense that these trees are see-through. The blue sky is visible behind them, right? The line of the trees, the green trees are also visible back there. And so I'm doing a light wash over these areas. Leave some of those trunks. I want to get a sense for, those trees and how they are see-through-ish, because they're mostly, there's not much foliage on those trees. They're mostly just dead branches with really nothing on them right now at this time of year. And so I'm doing that. And again, you might look at those and go, well, I don't really see red in there. Where do you see red? Well, there is a little bit. There's a little bit of a sense of red, and I maybe a little bit of artistic license with that color choice, but I like to try and have all three primary colors in every painting that I do. And of course we have the red of the barn already, so but even with this foliage, I want to try and put a little bit of red into that. I'm not doing it everywhere. I'm doing it in these just a few areas where I feel like I could accentuate some other tree colors. It shows up over on the far right as well, but I think I'm not going to do that there. I'm going to continue with this same color combination here and go into this foreground mass of trees here. Just add some more color there. Now in these trees in here, they're actually lighter on top but then darker at the bottom near where they hit the ground. So I'm actually going to take some of the, go back to that green mixture that I had before, and what I'm doing is putting the green yellow red combination near the tops of these trees, and then getting it kind of wet, and then coming back and taking the green, which is a combination of my ultramarine blue and the green, this is the green mixture I mixed up before, and I'm kind of blending that in from the bottom up, right? Because that's what I kind of see going on in this reference image. And it gets pretty dark near the ground there, so added some blue into it and darkened it up even a bit more. Same thing, take this red and gold mixture and come up into this tree up in here, this area here, but then go back and take my darker greenish colors and let those blend in upwards towards okay. Now, how does that blend in with the foreground in front of it? Well, it doesn't give you, you don't have, right now I have a really distinct line, right, that goes along there. But honestly, if you look at the reference picture, it's not that hard of an edge. So I'm going to take this greeny color and with a fair bit of water on the brush, I'm going to come in here, and it even goes right up underneath that a little out barn building there. Okay. So I start with the green, and then I get some of the gold color, and I'm moving from the top down. Not painting everywhere entirely because there's areas I'm just letting the gold that I had put in there before shine through, so to speak. Moving down and getting some of the reddy mixture that I had. I'm not using very good names for my colors. Reddy. Oh boy. And now it's getting a little too intense, so I'm going to come back with more water, clean out my brush, and just let this blend down into the colors that don't want to go too dark, right? I like that. I think that looks pretty good. And then down to this area down here, and as I get near the bottom, it starts to darken again, right, with this greeny color. So I made that all wet real quick, and now I'm just picking up a little bit of the lightness, that green, and mixing it right back in there. There we go. And there's a subtle gradation of colors from kind of green at this area into a reddish and yellowy gold, and then back down to the green. And then of course I can still see that original wash is shining through, which is the lightest areas. Okay. Alrighty, so that looks pretty good. And now I'm seeing one area I haven't done yet, and that would be the roof, the roof of the barn. Okay. Now obviously it's not a pure white in the painting. It is instead a grayish color. So I need this is where I go back to my indigo, which I used before up in the sky at the bottom of the clouds, and we can see, yeah, that's a pretty good match of colors to use for the roof of the barn. So I'm going to grab some of that indigo and bring it out here. Oop, that's too dark. Alright, so got some of the pigment off my brush, and now the barn roof has three different main sections in it, right? The top, middle, and bottom. The bottom's the darkest of the three. And but I am going to work from top down, I think. So I'm going to come in. I'm working wet on dry here, and I'm going to do that first third of the barn roof there in a color I think that looks, try to get that tone right, or the value I should say, which is the relative lightness or darkness of that area, and then come down. And you know, I think I'm even going to leave that center area, not paint it right away. I'm going to go down to the third area down here and do there. Now there is a light, almost white edge there. I'm going to leave that by not painting right up to the edge there. I'm going to do it like that initially, because if I paint right up to that in that center section, now what's going to happen is it's going to there's just going to blend, and then I'm not going to have a hard edge, and the two tones or values of gray will blend, and then I'll get a soft edge. The problem with that is it's not a soft edge in the picture, right? It's actually quite a hard edge. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. Okay, I'll do a little bit on this door, super light. There's areas underneath this roof that are darker. I just kind of created some, I don't know, various shapes over here that represent some kind of structure in the picture. I wasn't super accurate to the picture. I didn't really want to try to be super accurate, so there's actually almost a little bit of a blue there, like a tarp or something. So you know, I think I'm actually gonna, there's not really red in the picture, but I think I'm going to make it look like there's some red over there too on the edge of those, as if they're painted the same color as the barn, just to try to tie it into what I've already got going on with the barn over there. Again, it's not the way it is in the picture, but that's okay. And the roof is going to be more of a lightish color. Okay. I see in this, I'm going to take my Indigo and come over, and I see I have to be careful here because I wasn't totally sure that this was really dry yet, but it seems to be fine. I'm putting in some indigo over here, which would be underneath that outbuilding. Just really wanting to accentuate the darkness there, and doing the same over here in the other building. Oh yeah. The barn is enough dry at this point that I can go and put that darkness on that door on the side. I'm going to let this dry for a second. Okay, what I want to do now is, again, I'm moving slowly from larger brushes into smaller brushes as I start to think more about the detail that I want to create. I'm looking at the barn, and it definitely needs some detail. It's the focal point of the picture, but right now there's not really much detail there. I'm gonna come and grab some of my, and again this is dry now, I just dried it, and the light is coming from the upper left corner, and so the shadow is going to be made by this eave here and here. Of course, eaves always make a good shadow. We need to put that in there. And okay, that'll help give some shape to the barn. There's I think I might, yeah. We've got this fairly dark doorway here. We have a couple windows here that are dark, and I was not able to retain the whites around there that would show you the trim. I'll show you a little trick for that later once we finish up. Got some other windows on the side, and again they are mostly white looking, but I didn't retain the whites. I'm just going to put some dark there to represent this doorway, or sorry, windows. And maybe even just some dark lines along the edge of these white areas that are just more of a shadow. There's something, you know, down at the bottom here is dark. There's also I think it's actually a ladder. It's hanging along the side of the building there, but we'll just put a line there and some vertical lines. If I go over here, these little outbuildings over on the left were also similarly having some dark edges, needing some, looks like shadow cast there. And over on this other side building. I never really did anything with the center color, the center portion of the roof. It's not pure white in the actual painting, so I'm going to just put down a light bit of the this is Indigo again. This one in the back is a little darker, so I'm going to emphasize that. Put down another wash of the gray there. Now, the entire barn is lighter on the left and darker on the right. So I can, and this red is all completely dry, so I can take a really light wash of my indigo, right, and go over this area, emphasizing the fact that this side of the barn is darker than, I think I might actually get some of the actual red mixed in there as well. It's helping me see that the right side of that barn there is a little bit darker than the left because of the way the light is shining, and that will just help whenever you can emphasize the values, the various values of an object, representing its shape. That's really going to help. Okay, so the right side's a little darker now. And I did leave white edges along in here because that's what I see in that reference picture, so I didn't go right up to the edge of the other colors. I'll leave that for now. I may come back later and add some more shadows, etc., but for now I'm just going to do that. One other thing I want to do is over here in these trees, I want to do a little negative painting around. Again, some of these trees had another thing I want to do here is I want to come back and do a little negative painting around these trees because they I really want those trunks, at least in a few places, to really stand out a little bit. Mix up again some more of my gold and the ultramarine blue, and let's do some of this negative painting in here around these trunks, these trees. Again, when you want to emphasize something like this, you don't have to paint every single tree, every single trunk. You choose a few of them and emphasize them by doing some negative painting around them, and you suggest or hint to your viewer what those shapes are there through negative painting. And again, if those are, some of the edges are a little too dark, you can soften some of those edges up. When we were doing these shapes earlier, it was difficult to emphasize all of the different shapes because we were going fairly quickly, and all. So now we're coming back, and with a smaller brush, again, a negative painting around some of these trunks, just to emphasize what's going on there in some of the shapes. What do I mean by negative shape? Negative painting, seeing the negative shape that's created by the actual object. In other words, the trees here. We know these trees have a shape to them, but the shape in between the shapes is that negative shape. Again, I don't want all these edges to be super real sharp edges, so I'm coming back with water on my brush in some of the areas anyways, not all of them, because some of them are real sharp edges right up against the trunks, etc. We have to get the relative size of the trunks correct as well, because these are, all about the same distance away from the viewer, and so they're all going to be relatively the same size trunks, right? They're not, some aren't like really huge and others, and so you got to be aware of that as well. I'm also going to now come up in here and just, this is this red area that I had created kind of a sense of the trees going up into the sky. I just laid down colors there, but I need to come back with a little bit of the dark that would represent the actual limbs. Again, you don't try to draw them all in, but just a few of them will give a sense to the viewer what's going on there. gone ahead and got out my really small number 1, I think. This is, yeah, number 1 brush, very small, like a liner. And I'm just going to come in, basically taking my indigo, which is my darkest color. If you don't put a lot of water in the indigo, it really is essentially like almost like black. Now, most people don't say they don't really paint with black. Again, it's really a bluish gray is what it is if you were to wash it out at all. But if you put it down pretty intense, it can give you a nice dark color. So I just want to emphasize again on the barn, because the barn is our primary subject. I just really want to emphasize some of the details here. A lot of those details are really quite dark, almost black, and I don't want to line everything. I'm not trying to put an outline, for so to speak, around everything, but there are some areas here where I think some real emphasis of some of the shapes would help. The line along up here under the eaves needs a little more emphasis, I think. Those window shapes were real dark. Can mix this in with some of the red as well, so that as you lay this down, it'll actually have a reddish cast to that, which will mix in nicely with the color of the barn. A bit more, some of these shapes over here, just want to emphasize on these outbuildings. Again, where the shadows would be cast. I mentioned earlier I would show you a little trick. One thing sometimes people do is use a jelly roll white pen. If you have areas that you just really want to emphasize a little bit of white, you don't want to use this too much. Just put down, if there are areas where you feel like you want to emphasize like a white edge and you just weren't able to retain that at the time of painting, you can use something like this. I guess some watercolor purists feel like, oh, you shouldn't do that. It's like, you know, it's basically, it's, you know, not exactly watercolor, but you know, again, these edges of these little windows that we were not able to retain that white when we were painting with much larger wash. I'm just putting that in there, and seems to make it pop a little bit, which nothing wrong with that. Don't want to overdo it with this, just here and there. So I realize I keep throwing new little materials at you that you maybe don't have in your box of tricks yet, but these are just ideas and things that you can add to your toolkit for your watercolor painting that come in really handy, and you'll find a lot of people do use them from time to time. So all these little tricks. Alrighty, well, the last thing I see I need to do here is I need to go in and add my little fence line in the very front of the painting. So I'm looking at that, and I actually see, I don't just see, it doesn't really a pure black. It almost looks like it's got a little red in it. Maybe it's a rusty. And so I'm going to take some of my Alizarin Crimson, which I had used earlier, mixing it in with my Indigo, and I'm using my number 1 brush, and I'm just going to line these in. I think it looks better if you use maybe a color like this as opposed to, say, a black. It's not quite as intense, and you don't really have to, you can kind of start and stop your line a little bit, again, because if you look at the reference image, it may be like that. You might see it and then not see it and then see it again. And so that can be a good way of doing it. And even coming back with a little wet brush, pure, just clean water, and just softening those little lines up. I don't want them to be too obvious, too strong, at least not all the way across, and so I'm just kind of going back and softening. And like some of these posts, especially where they're a little bit bigger, on the right hand side, I think they're darker on the right than on the left, and something like that. I don't want the eye to be drawn too much, right, to these little fence lines at the front, because it's really not the main part of the picture. And so you have to be careful that you don't make them too strong. And that's why I didn't choose the Indigo there, but rather a kind of another color that wasn't quite as strong, and then even tried to soften the edges, and then kind of did a start and stop effect to the lines so that they're not just a solid line the whole way across the foreground. It'll just look a little fake if you do that. Okay, well, I think that this is a good place to stop. It's about an hour long lesson, which is what I try to keep it to. And here we have a Skagit Valley red barn with a tree line in the back, and we kind of talked about how to do sky a little bit. So hopefully you found this helpful and that this was a fun lesson for you. Thanks for being here today.